It started with a letter that should have never been opened. A single envelope, yellowed by time, sealed with wax that had cracked like old bones. Inside was a confession. Handwritten, trembling, desperate. It began with 4 words that still haunt the descendants of the family today. We should have buried it. In a quiet corner of Pennsylvania, the Mercer family had lived on the same land for generations. Their farmhouse, whitewashed and weathered, sat like a ghost among the trees. The kind of place you'd pass without noticing, the kind of place that kept its own silence. But silence doesn't erase memory, it buries it alive. The Mercers were respected once, wealthy, church-going, the very image of rural decency. But behind the closed doors of that house, something had taken root. Something dark. And by the time the last Mercer heir found that letter in 1998, the bloodline was already cursed beyond repair. The story, as it's pieced together now, begins in the 1870s, when the first cracks appeared, not in the house, but in the family itself. There were whispers of strange behavior, of a daughter who never left her room, of a boy who spoke to no one but kept digging holes in the orchard. Town records mention incidents, but never details. It's as if someone went through and erased what really happened, line by line, generation after generation. But they missed the letter. And they missed the diaries that were hidden in the attic, pages that tell of dreams that didn't belong to the people who dreamed them, voices that came from the walls at night. One passage, written in 1912, reads, "We are bound by blood, but not by choice." The last surviving Mercer, an old woman named Caroline, lived alone until her death. No one claimed the house after her. The land was auctioned off, the house left to rot. But the locals say that even now, if you walk by the property at night, you can hear something. Not a voice exactly, but a rhythm, like breath behind a wall. And if you listen closely, it sounds like someone whispering a name that time tried to erase. The Mercer name. By the time anyone began asking questions, most of the people who could have answered them were already gone. Caroline Mercer's death in 1998 should have been the end of the story. An old woman dying alone in a forgotten house. But when the county officials entered to catalog her estate, they found more than dust and decay. The basement door had been sealed shut with wooden beams from the inside. And carved into the beams, in a hand shaky but deliberate, were the words, "Do not unseal what was sealed in sin." Of course, they unsealed it. Curiosity always wins. What they found was a small, windowless room lined with newspaper clippings, family photos, and dozens of handwritten pages tacked to the walls. They weren't letters or diary entries, more like confessions, written over decades by different hands, all signed the same way, M. No one ever confirmed who M was. Some believed it stood for Mercer. Others thought it might have been the name of the first daughter, the one who vanished from census records in 1874. All we know is that the earliest of those writings spoke of atonement, of a sin passed down in flesh, and of debt paid in children. That last phrase, a debt paid in children, appears again and again in the Mercer records. Some genealogists have tried to explain it as superstition, others as metaphor. But there are birth records that make no sense. Children born years apart, but registered under the same parents. Twins listed but only one grave. Generations where the father's name is missing entirely. Something had broken inside that family, not just morally, but biologically. And when you start to trace their lineage forward, the pattern gets worse. Mental illness, disfigurement, sudden disappearances. Every few decades, a child born who was never officially recorded, but who appears in the background of photographs, always the same face, always slightly off. And then there's Caroline. Her autopsy noted no immediate family, but when the coroner performed the examination, he found a silver locket stitched into the lining of her nightgown. Inside was a faded picture of a young man, maybe a relative, and a lock of his hair. But on the back of the photo were 3 words carved so faintly they almost vanished under the glass. "Forgive me, brother." After Caroline's death, the Mercer property was scheduled for demolition. But before the bulldozers arrived, a group of local historians convinced the county to allow them inside, just for one night, to archive what they could. One of them, a man named Daniel Harper, later said it was the most disturbing experience of his life. When he entered the upstairs bedrooms, the air felt heavy, not stale, but charged, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Every surface was coated in dust except for one, a vanity mirror that looked freshly wiped. In its reflection, Daniel said, the hallway behind him looked slightly different, longer, darker, stretching farther than it should have. He blinked, and it was gone. The historians took hundreds of photos, catalogued furniture, clothing, and boxes of documents. But what caught their attention most were the family portraits. In nearly every one, there was a figure whose face had been scratched out. Not once or twice. Every generation. Sometimes it was the mother, sometimes a child. And in one photograph from 1901, the figure was removed so violently that the glass shattered around it. But the paper remained intact, as if the image refused to disappear. One of the boxes they found contained Caroline's journals. They were erratic, written in fragments, sometimes lucid, sometimes unreadable. But the recurring theme was always the same: guilt. She wrote about the thing that was kept alive and how the family's blood was never meant to mix again. She wrote about hearing crying in the cellar, the same crying her grandmother had described 70 years earlier. In one entry, dated 1964, she wrote, "Every night, I hear him. I hear the voice under the floor. It says the same thing again and again. The debt is not paid. I tried to burn the letters. I tried to forget. But forgetting is how it grows stronger." When Daniel and his team finished, they sealed the journals into an evidence crate and turned them over to the local museum. But within 2 months, the museum suffered a mysterious electrical fire. The Mercer documents, every photo, every page, every trace of the family's written record, were destroyed. Only one item survived: a photograph, warped by heat, showing Caroline as a young woman, standing beside a man who looks eerily like her. Too similar. And if you look closely, you can see their hands touching, fingers intertwined, almost lovingly. The caption on the back reads, "Summer, 1932, our wedding day." The photo was dismissed as a misunderstanding, or at least that's what people preferred to believe. But local gossip in the late 1930s hinted otherwise. Town records show that Caroline left school abruptly at 17, moved away for 2 years, then returned with a man no one recognized. They lived together in the Mercer house, but were never married publicly. No witnesses, no certificate, no mention in church records. Yet everyone in town knew. The Mercers had always been strange, private, withdrawn, always keeping to themselves. But after that, the family seemed to retreat entirely from the world. Neighbors said the windows were covered from the inside. Deliveries were left at the gate. The mailman claimed he once heard a baby crying, then silence, absolute silence, like the sound had been swallowed by the walls. When the census taker came in 1940, he listed 2 residents: Caroline Mercer, age 25, male relative, name withheld by request. But there's something unusual about that record. The handwriting of the second name, the one that was later blacked out, matches Caroline's. She had written it herself. It wasn't until years later, when Daniel Harper's team recovered fragments of Caroline's journals, that they found an entry marked only by a date, April 3, 1934. It read, "He said it was the only way to end the curse, to bring it back to its beginning. But I feel it growing inside me. It isn't a child. It's history repeating itself." Some claim Caroline had a son that year. Others say the child didn't survive. No records, no graves, no mention beyond her writing. But there are rumors. In the 1950s, people swore they saw a young man wandering the edge of the Mercer property at night. Same pale eyes, same limp as Caroline's brother had before he died. What makes this worse is what was found decades later: A coroner's report from 1935, unsigned, describing the discovery of a small coffin hidden beneath the floorboards of the Mercer home. The body inside was too decomposed for identification, but traces of mercury were found in the remains, a substance once used in early purification rituals. And beneath that report, someone had written in pencil, "One of us had to end it." But if the curse truly ended there, why did Caroline keep hearing the crying? Why did she write, nearly 60 years later, "He never left the house"? Because maybe he didn't. When investigators finally demolished the Mercer house in 2001, they expected nothing more than rotting beams and mold. But deep beneath the foundation, under layers of brick and earth, they discovered something the blueprints had never shown. A chamber, perfectly square. No door leading to it, only a sealed passage hidden behind the old furnace. Inside, they found 3 objects: a rusted cot, a metal bowl, and a leather-bound book wrapped in oilcloth. The book was stiff with age, the ink faded but still legible enough to read. It wasn't Caroline's handwriting. It was older, much older. The first entry was dated 1873. It spoke of a family oath, sworn between siblings, to preserve what was created in blood. The writer spoke of an infant born, twice, marked, and of how Oot's breath would carry the memory of all who came before. That same year, town archives mention a fire at the Mercer barn and the unexplained disappearance of 2 children. Their names were erased from the record not long after. The diary continued through the decades, each generation adding their own entries, a twisted kind of scripture. It chronicled births, rituals, and punishments. Every 50 years, the same pattern appeared: a birth outside the town's notice, followed by years of secrecy, then tragedy. The last entry, dated 1934, was signed CM, and ended with the line, "I have joined what cannot be divided. May this be the last union." Experts believe Honyan referred to incest, the deliberate act of binding the bloodline back to itself. The Mercers, convinced their curse began through sin, sought to purify it by repetition, believing that what was tainted could be made whole again by rejoining. But if that was their intent, it only deepened the darkness. Genetic disorders worsened. Mental illness spread like rot through the generations. And according to town legend, by the time Caroline was born, the line had folded in on itself so completely that she was both descendant and ancestor, her own blood's echo. When the chamber was sealed again, the county quietly ended the investigation. The artifacts were labeled as historical contamination and removed from record. The land was sold to a development company that, for reasons never disclosed, abandoned the project within months. Locals say the ground there never stays still. Some nights, the earth shifts, just slightly, as though something beneath it remembers how to breathe. Years passed, and the Mercer story slipped back into rumor. The kind people whisper about in bars or around campfires, half believing, half trying to scare themselves. But in 2012, something resurfaced that reignited the legend. A construction crew was clearing the old Mercer land for a new housing project when one of the workers unearthed a metal box. Small, sealed tight, engraved with the letter M. Inside were photographs, perfectly preserved, and a single reel of film. The photos showed Caroline at different ages, standing by the same window, wearing the same dress. The decades changed, but her face didn't. The film reel was sent to a private archivist for restoration. When the footage was finally played, it lasted only 40 seconds. Grainy, silent. Caroline stands in a dark room holding a candle. Behind her, a figure moves, tall, pale, featureless. She turns toward it, as if listening, then smiles. At the end, she mouths a few words. There's no sound, but lip readers later agreed on what she said. It's time to come back. After that discovery, the reel was seized by state authorities. No one outside the investigation has seen it since. But a report from the archivist leaked online years later, claiming that the film stock was dated decades before Caroline was even born. That's when the Mercer property became more than a ghost story. Paranormal groups, historians, and even genetic researchers began digging deeper. They found something unsettling. DNA samples taken from old Mercer graves showed anomalies, markers inconsistent with any known lineage, as if parts of their genetic code had repeated, looping back on itself. No one can fully explain what that means. Some believe it's scientific proof of extreme inbreeding. Others think it's something older. A bloodline collapsing inward until it becomes something new, something that remembers itself too well. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you try to bury it, or would you want to know the truth? Because truth, once found, cannot be buried again, and neither can what waits for it to be uncovered. Those who visited the Mercer site say that on quiet nights, you can still hear it. That slow, steady rhythm beneath the soil. Some think it's just the echo of old plumbing or shifting ground. But others say it sounds too much like a heartbeat, and it's getting louder. In the years since the Mercer estate was leveled, the story has taken on a life of its own, part folklore, part warning. But the strange thing about the Mercer curse is how it refuses to stay contained. People who've gone near the land, surveyors, hikers, thrill seekers, have reported the same thing, a sense of being watched, not by something physical, but by memory itself. One local historian, who'd spent months piecing together the genealogy, claimed the name Mercer appears in county records hundreds of miles apart. On birth certificates, marriage licenses, property deeds, always connected to families who eventually vanished or changed their names. It's as if the bloodline didn't die, it scattered. A genealogist working in Virginia discovered that one of her clients, a perfectly ordinary man from a nearby town, shared genetic markers identical to those recovered from the Mercer graves. When she told him, he grew pale and asked, "Does that mean it's still in me?" He stopped answering her calls after that. Even today, the Mercer site remains undeveloped. The company that owns the land refuses to explain why. Workers have reported hearing voices when equipment digs too deep, not screams but whispers. Words no one can make out, except for one name that keeps repeating. Caroline. There's a rumor, unconfirmed, but persistent, that the last surviving Mercer artifact, the heat-warped wedding photo, was stolen from the county archive. A few months later, an anonymous package was mailed to a local radio station. Inside was a photo of that same picture, but altered. The background, once empty, now shows two figures standing behind Caroline and her brother. Their faces are blurred but faintly visible, enough to see that they're smiling. The note attached had only one line: "The blood remembers." And maybe that's what this story really is. Not a haunting, not a curse, but memory refusing to fade. Memory embedded so deeply in generations that it becomes something living, something hungry. If you drive past that land today, you won't see anything but grass and trees. But those who know where to look say the ground still breathes, that it shifts in patterns too deliberate to be wind. And if you stay long enough, you might hear a whisper. Not from the earth, but from your own blood, asking the same question that haunted them all.